The blood-red sun sank behind the jagged horizon as Nora Owens ran her fingertips over her mother's simple wooden cross, the fresh dirt of the grave still loose beneath her knees. It was 1878, and at 20 years old, she had just lost the only person who had ever truly protected her in the harsh reality of Salina, Kansas. "Time to head back, girl," Frank Ridley, her stepfather, growled from atop his horse. "That dead woman ain't coming back, and I got dinner needs making." Nora wiped away her tears with trembling hands, the late April wind catching her honey-brown hair. 6 years ago, her mother had married Frank after Nora's father died in a mining accident. What began as hope for security quickly descended into a nightmare of cruelty masked from the townspeople by Frank's charming public persona. "I said now." Frank's voice cut through her grief like a whip. Nora stood, brushing dirt from her threadbare dress. "Yes, sir." The ride back to their homestead passed in silence. Frank had been drinking again. She could smell the whiskey from 2 paces away. Since her mother's passing 3 days ago, consumption had taken her. After months of suffering, his temper had grown even shorter. As they approached their small, weather-beaten house on the outskirts of town, Nora's stomach clenched. Without her mother as a buffer, Frank's true nature emerged unrestrained. Just yesterday, he had struck her across the face for burning the biscuits, leaving a bruise she'd tried to hide from the few mourners who'd come to pay respects. "Get to work," Frank ordered as he dismounted. "And don't be thinking your mama's passing changes anything. You still owe me for putting a roof over your head all these years." Nora hurried inside to prepare supper, her mind racing. She had to leave, she knew that now. Her mother's dying words echoed in her mind. "Find your way, my darling. Don't let my choices determine your fate." Later that night, after Frank had passed out in his chair with an empty bottle at his feet, Nora slipped into her small room. From beneath a loose floorboard, she retrieved the meager savings she'd managed to hide away from her laundry work in town, $4.63. Not enough to start over, but perhaps enough to get her somewhere safer. Sleep evaded her as she planned her escape. Come morning, she would go into town under the pretense of buying supplies. Perhaps Mrs. Wilson at the general store might know of work opportunities far from Salina. The older woman had always been kind to Nora, sometimes slipping her extra thread or a piece of hard candy when Frank wasn't looking. Dawn broke with the promise of a scorching day. Nora rose early, preparing Frank's breakfast before he woke. As he ate in sullen silence, she carefully broached her request. "We're low on flour and coffee, Frank. I thought I might go to town today," he grunted, not looking up from his plate. "Take that scrawny mare, and don't waste my money on foolishness." "Yes, sir." Nora kept her eyes downcast, fighting to control the hope rising in her chest. An hour later, she guided the old mare down Salina's main street, her heart pounding. The town was already bustling with morning activity, merchants opening shops, ranch hands gathering supplies, women exchanging gossip near the millinery. Nora tied the mare to the hitching post outside Wilson's general store, straightening her faded blue dress before entering. The familiar scent of leather, coffee beans, and dried goods greeted her. "Nora, dear," Mrs. Wilson called from behind the counter, her kind eyes shadowed with concern. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing, Mrs. Wilson." Nora approached, lowering her voice. "I was wondering if you might know of any opportunities. For work, I mean. Somewhere not too close to Salina." Understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes as she glanced at the partially concealed bruise on Nora's cheek. "Your stepfather's true colors showing now that your poor mother's gone." Nora nodded, shame heating her face despite knowing the fault wasn't hers. Mrs. Wilson leaned closer. "As it happens, I do know something. Grant Westfield's ranch about 20 miles west of here. He's looking for household help. His sister, who kept house for him, just married and moved to Colorado Territory. Grant Westfield, Nora struggled to place the name, owns the Double W. Good man, from what I hear. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair. Stopped in yesterday for supplies, mentioned needing someone reliable. Mrs. Wilson paused, studying Nora's face. It would be hard work, but you'd have your own room in the house, meals provided. Hope fluttered in Nora's chest. 20 miles is far enough that Frank wouldn't likely come looking. Mr. Westfield is expected back in town this afternoon for more supplies. If you'd like, you could speak with him then. For the first time since her mother's death, Nora felt a spark of possibility. I would be most grateful, Mrs. Wilson. The hours dragged as Nora completed her shopping, then found excuses to linger in town. She helped the minister's wife organize donated clothing at the church and took lunch at the small cafe, spending precious pennies on a bowl of stew to justify her continued presence. By mid-afternoon, her nerves were frayed. What if this cowboy found her unsuitable? What if Frank discovered her plans before she could escape? She was examining fabric scraps in the mercantile when Mrs. Wilson appeared at her elbow. "He's here," she whispered, "at the feed store. I've mentioned you to him already." Nora's heart leaped into her throat. "Thank you. I'll go speak with him now." With trembling legs, she crossed the street to Johnson's Feed and Seed. Inside, she spotted a tall man in conversation with Mr. Johnson. Even from behind, there was no mistaking him for a town dweller. Everything from his sun-weathered hat to his worn boots spoke of ranch life. As though sensing her presence, he turned. Nora found herself looking up into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a tanned face beneath dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the dandies who sometimes pass through town, but his features held a rugged appeal that made her suddenly conscious of her plain appearance. "Miss Owens." His voice was deep, with a gentleness that surprised her. "Yes, sir, Mrs. Wilson mentioned you might be looking for household help." Grant Westfield studied her, his gaze lingering briefly on the fading bruise before politely shifting away. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. "I am indeed." He gestured toward the door. "Perhaps we could discuss this outside." Once on the boardwalk, Grant turned to face her directly. "Mrs. Wilson mentioned your situation. My condolences about your mother." "Thank you, Mr. Westfield. Call me Grant." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. "I'll be plain with you, Miss Owens. I need someone to cook, clean, and help manage the household. It's just me and 3 ranch hands at present. The work is steady but demanding. In return, you'd have safe lodging, meals, and $15 a month." $15. Nora couldn't hide her surprise. It was more than she dared hope for. "I should mention," he continued, "the ranch is isolated. Town visits happen every few weeks at most." "Isolation sounds like a blessing, Mr. Westfield Grant," she replied honestly, something in his expression softened. "Mrs. Wilson speaks highly of you, says you're a hard worker." "I am." Nora straightened her shoulders. "I can cook, clean, mend, and I learn quickly." "When could you start?" The direct question startled her. "As soon as possible, today even." Grant raised an eyebrow. "Today?" Nora glanced nervously down the street, half expecting to see Frank's angry form approaching. "My stepfather. It would be best if I didn't return home." Understanding darkened Grant's features. "I see." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded decisively. "I have some business to finish, then we can leave. Do you have belongings to collect?" "Only what I'm carrying." The small bundle containing her mother's locket, A change of clothes and her pitiful savings was tucked in her market basket. Grant's jaw tightened, but he only said, "Very well. Meet me at the livery in 1 hour. We'll depart then." That hour was the longest of Nora's life. She paced behind the church, out of sight from the main street, fighting alternating waves of terror and hope. What if Frank came looking for her? What if this was all a terrible mistake? She knew nothing about Grant Westfield beyond Mrs. Wilson's recommendation. But when the church bell chimed 4 o'clock, Nora knew she had no choice. A life with an unknown cowboy had to be better than certain misery with Frank. At the livery, she found Grant waiting with 2 horses, his sturdy chestnut gelding and a gentle-looking bay mare. "Ever ridden astride, Miss Owens?" he asked, helping her mount. "Not since I was a child." She arranged her skirts as modestly as possible, grateful for the relative privacy of the livery's interior. "The mare's gentle. Just follow my lead." Grant handed her the reins. "We should reach the ranch before nightfall if we keep a steady pace." As they rode out of town, Nora couldn't help glancing back at the place that had been her home for all her 20 years. Despite the hardships, especially after her mother's marriage to Frank, leaving stirred unexpected melancholy. "Having second thoughts?" Grant asked quietly. "No," she replied firmly. "Just saying goodbye." They rode in companionable silence as Selina disappeared behind them. The landscape opened into rolling prairie, vibrant with spring growth. After an hour, Grant pointed to a distant line of trees. "That creek marks the beginning of Double W land. Another hour and we'll reach the ranch house. How large is your property?" Nora asked, finding her voice after the long silence. 800 acres, not the biggest spread but good grazing land. I run about 200 head of cattle plus some horses." "You've built it all yourself," Grant's expression grew distant. "My father started it. I took over 5 years ago when he passed." "I'm sorry for your loss," he nodded acknowledgement. "Your accent, you're not originally from Kansas." "My parents came from Missouri when I was small. My father followed the promise of mining work." "And your mother remarried after his passing?" Nora's hands tightened on the reins. "Yes, Frank Ridley seemed kind at first." Grant didn't press for details, which Nora appreciated. Instead, he pointed out landmarks and spoke of the ranch, the spring calving, the new well he'd dug last autumn, the vegetable garden his sister had tended before her marriage. As the sun began its descent, they crested a gentle rise, and the Double W came into view. The main house was larger than Nora had expected, a sturdy 2-story structure with a broad porch. Nearby stood a barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings, all well maintained. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a corral held several horses. "It's lovely," Nora said with genuine admiration. Grant's expression warmed with pride. "Thank you. My father had a good eye for land." As they approached, 2 men emerged from the barn. Grant raised a hand in greeting. "That's Miguel and Caleb, 2 of my hands. The third, Jake, is probably out checking the north pasture." The men watched curiously as Grant helped Nora dismount, her legs stiff from the unaccustomed ride. "Boys, this is Miss Nora Owens. She'll be taking over household duties." Grant's tone made it clear this was not a topic for discussion. "Miss Owens, Miguel Rodriguez and Caleb Taylor." Both men touched their hats respectfully. Miguel was older, perhaps 40, with silver threading his dark hair. Caleb couldn't have been more than 25, with freckles scattered across his friendly face. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Owens," Caleb said. Miguel nodded politely. "I'll show you inside," Grant said, taking her small bundle and leading her toward the house. "The men take their meals in the bunkhouse most days, except Sunday dinner, which we share in the main house." The interior of the home revealed a masculine simplicity, functional furniture, minimal decorations, everything clean but lacking a woman's touch. The front room held a stone fireplace, a worn sofa, two chairs and bookshelves filled with volumes that surprised Nora with their variety. "You read," she observed without thinking. Grant looked almost embarrassed. "Winter evenings are long." He showed her the kitchen, spacious with a good stove and ample storage, then upstairs to a bedroom that had belonged to his sister. "This will be your quarters," he said, setting down her bundle. "Mine is at the end of the hall. The washroom is between. I'll give you some time to settle in before supper." When he left, Nora sank onto the bed, overcome. The room was simply furnished but comfortable, with a bed, dresser, washstand, and rocking chair near the window. After years of sleeping in what amounted to a closet in Frank's house, the space seemed palatial. From the window, she could see the ranch spread below, horses in the corral, chickens pecking near the barn, the endless prairie beyond. For the first time since her mother's death, Nora allowed herself to hope that perhaps this new beginning might lead to something better than mere survival. After washing her face and hands in the basin, she went downstairs to prepare supper, determined to prove her worth immediately. The pantry was well stocked, and she soon had biscuits in the oven and a pot of stew simmering. Grant entered as she was setting the table, the scent of soap suggesting he'd cleaned up as well. "Something smells good," he said appreciatively. "Just a simple stew. Tomorrow I can bake bread and perhaps pie if you have fruit preserved. There are jars of peaches my sister put up last summer." He paused, watching her work. "Miss Owens, I want to be clear about something. You're safe here. I hired you for your cooking and cleaning, nothing more." Nora's cheeks flamed as she understood his meaning. "I never thought, I know, but I wanted to say it plainly. Some men." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "Well, some men take advantage. That won't happen here." "Thank you," she said simply, surprised by the emotion that welled in her throat. They ate together at the kitchen table, the conversation awkward at first, but easing as Grant spoke of ranch matters and Nora asked questions about her duties. By the time they finished, a comfortable understanding had developed between them. "I rise before dawn," Grant explained as he helped clear the dishes despite Nora's protests. "Breakfast at 5:30 for the men and me. They handle their own midday meal usually, and supper around 6. Laundry day is Monday, baking day Wednesday. The rest you can organize as you see fit." After they finished washing up, Grant bid her good night and retreated to his study. Nora climbed the stairs to her room, exhaustion from the day's events finally catching up to her. As she prepared for bed in her new nightgown, one of the few things she'd managed to bring, she realized with surprise that she hadn't thought of Frank or her fear of him for hours. In the soft darkness of her new room, with only moonlight streaming through the curtains, Nora whispered a prayer of thanks to her mother's memory and allowed herself to rest, truly rest, for the first time in years. The rooster's crow woke Nora before dawn. For a disorienting moment, she didn't recognize her surroundings, but then memory returned. She was at the W Ranch, safe from Frank, beginning a new chapter. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, pinned her hair neatly, and hurried downstairs to start breakfast. The kitchen stove needed stoking, and she worked efficiently to heat water for coffee and mix batter for flapjacks. By the time heavy footsteps sounded on the porch, she had the table set and food ready. Grant entered, followed by his 3 ranch hands. He paused in surprise at the sight of the laden table. "Good morning," Nora greeted them, suddenly shy under the curious gazes of 4 men. "You've been busy," Grant said, appreciation evident in his voice. "This is Jake Morris, by the way. Jake, Miss Nora Owens." Jake, A weathered man of about Grant's age with a friendly smile touched his hat. "Madam, mighty fine to have home cooking again." The men ate with hearty appreciation, complimenting her flapjacks and coffee. Nora remained in the background, replenishing platters and pouring coffee as needed, observing the easy camaraderie among them. As they prepared to leave for their day's work, Grant lingered. "Is there anything you need from town?" "I won't be going for a while, but I could send one of the men if it's urgent." "I'm fine for now, thank you." Nora gathered empty plates. "Though I'd like to explore the garden later if that's acceptable." "Of course. The house and grounds are yours to manage." He hesitated. "If Frank Ridley comes looking for you, he won't," Nora interrupted, then softened her tone. "Frank doesn't care enough to track me down. He'll find someone else to cook his meals and clean his house." Grant studied her face for a moment. "Nevertheless, if anyone comes asking, the men know to direct them to me first." The protective gesture warmed something inside Nora. "Thank you." After the men departed, she set to work cleaning the kitchen, then explored the rest of the house more thoroughly. It was well built, but clearly needed a woman's care. Dust gathered in corners. Windows needed washing, and the front room showed signs of neglect. By midday, she had scrubbed the kitchen to a shine and started on the front room, finding satisfaction in the honest work. The garden proved promising, with early spring greens ready for harvesting. She picked lettuce and young onions for a salad to accompany supper. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Nora rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent mornings cleaning and baking, afternoons tending the garden or doing laundry, and evenings preparing hearty meals for Grant and occasionally the ranch hands. Grant proved to be a fair employer, never criticizing her work and often expressing appreciation for her efforts. He was gone for much of each day, returning tired but always taking time to ask about her day and share news of the ranch. Slowly, the house transformed under Nora's care. Fresh curtains sewn from fabric found in a chest, polished furniture, clean windows that let in streams of sunlight all brought new life to the rooms. The men noticed too, wiping their boots more carefully and complimenting the changes. After 2 weeks at the Double W, Nora realized with surprise that she no longer jumped at sudden sounds or flinched when one of the men raised a hand near her. The constant fear that had been her companion for years was fading, replaced by a growing confidence in her new surroundings. It was a Sunday evening in mid-May when things changed. Grant and Nora had shared dinner as usual, and she was washing dishes while he dried, a routine they'd fallen into despite her initial protests that it wasn't proper. "My sister's birthday is next week," Grant said suddenly. "I'd like to visit town, take her a gift. Would you want to come along? You might need things for yourself." Nora's hands stilled in the dishwater. Town meant the possibility of encountering Frank. "I'm not sure that's wise." Grant set down the plate he was drying. "You can't hide forever, Nora." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it startled her. "I'm not hiding," she protested. "I'm working." His expression softened. "I know Ridley hurt you, but you can't let fear of him control your life. It's not just that." Nora resumed scrubbing a pot with unnecessary vigor. "I don't have money for new things yet. You've earned your first month's wages. Besides, I owe you for transforming this place." His gesture encompassed the now cheerful kitchen with its gleaming surfaces and curtains Nora had made from flour sacks bleached and dyed blue. "You don't owe me anything beyond my wages. I'm just doing my job." Grant stepped closer, and Nora became acutely aware of his height, the breadth of his shoulders, the clean scent of soap and leather that always surrounded him. "You've done far more than that." His voice had dropped to a near whisper. "This house hasn't felt like a home since my sister left. Now it does." Something shifted in the air between them, a tension that hadn't been there before. Nora looked up to find Grant watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The moment shattered when one of the ranch hands knocked at the back door, needing Grant's attention for a sick calf. After he left, Nora pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks, unsettled by her reaction to him. Grant Westfield was her employer, nothing more. She couldn't afford to imagine otherwise. Yet the next day, when Grant announced they would ride to town on Wednesday, Nora found herself agreeing. Perhaps he was right, she couldn't hide forever. Besides, with the money she'd earned, she could purchase fabric for a new dress and some personal items she desperately needed. Wednesday dawned clear and mild. Nora dressed in her best outfit, a faded lavender dress that had once belonged to her mother, carefully altered to fit her smaller frame. She pinned her hair neatly and even dabbed a tiny amount of rose water behind her ears, a luxury she'd discovered in a half-empty bottle in her dresser drawer. Grant waited by the horses, dressed in clean clothes with his dark hair still damp from washing. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, and Nora felt a flush of pleasure at his evident admiration. "You look lovely," he said simply, helping her mount the bay mare that had become familiar to her on short rides around the ranch. The journey to town passed pleasantly, with Grant pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. As they approached Salina, however, Nora's anxiety returned. What if they encountered Frank? What would the townspeople think of her, riding alongside Grant Westfield after disappearing without explanation? "You're thinking too hard," Grant observed as they reached the outskirts of town. "Remember, you've done nothing wrong. You're a grown woman who chose to accept respectable employment." His quiet confidence steadied her. "You're right, thank you." Their first stop was Wilson's General Store, where Mrs. Wilson greeted Nora with a warm hug. "Look at you. Already some color in your cheeks and meat on your bones. The double W must agree with you." "It does," Nora admitted, conscious of Grant's presence nearby as he examined leather goods. "Mr. Westfield is a fair employer." "Just Mr. Westfield, is it?" Mrs. Wilson raised an eyebrow with a knowing smile that made Nora blush. "Grant," she corrected softly. "And yes, he's been very kind." While Grant selected a gift for his sister, a beautifully bound journal and set of pencils, Nora chose fabric for a new dress, thread, buttons, and personal items she needed. She insisted on paying with her own money, a declaration of independence that seemed to please Grant. They visited several other shops, with Nora growing more confident as they encountered only friendly faces. At the cafe where they stopped for lunch, the owner's wife pulled Nora aside. "Just so you know, dear, that stepfather of yours left town 2 weeks ago. Sold the house and headed for Colorado from what I heard. Said something about silver mining." Relief washed over Nora in a dizzying wave. Frank was gone. The last shadow hanging over her new life had vanished. When she shared this news with Grant as they rode home, he nodded, unsurprised. "I heard rumors in the barbershop. Didn't want to mention it until I was certain." "You knew and didn't tell me." "I wanted confirmation. No sense giving you false hope." Nora considered this, then smiled. "Thank you for being thoughtful." Something in Grant's expression shifted, softened. "You deserve thoughtfulness, Nora, and a great deal more." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to examine. Instead, they rode in companionable silence as the afternoon sun bathed the prairie in golden light. Life at the Double W settled into a new pattern after that day. Free from fear of Frank, Nora blossomed. She experimented with new recipes, expanded the garden, and even learned to ride properly when Grant offered to teach her on Sunday afternoons. Those Sundays became precious time hours, when employer and employee became simply Grant and Nora, riding across the rolling grasslands or sitting beneath the cottonwood trees by the creek. Grant shared stories of his childhood, of his father's dreams for the ranch, of his own hopes to expand their herd of cattle. Nora spoke of her mother's gentle wisdom, of books she'd loved, of her secret dream to someday travel to places she'd only read about. As May turned to June, something deeper grew between them, a friendship built on mutual respect and growing affection. Nora caught herself watching Grant when he wasn't looking, admiring the way sunlight caught in his dark hair or how his face transformed when he truly smiled. For his part, Grant found increasingly transparent excuses to be near the house when Nora worked in the garden or to help with tasks that didn't require his assistance. The ranch hands noticed, exchanging knowing glances when their boss lingered over breakfast or returned to the house earlier than necessary in the evenings. Miguel, the oldest and most direct, finally spoke to Nora one afternoon when he found her alone, hanging laundry. "The boss, he smiles now," he said simply. "Before you came, not so much smiling." Nora concentrated on pinning a shirt to the line, hoping her blush wasn't obvious. "I'm glad he's pleased with my work." Miguel's weathered face crinkled with amusement. "Not just the work, señorita." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Nora flustered and confused about her own feelings. Was she developing romantic feelings for Grant? And if so, what could come of them? He was her employer, a man of property and standing. She was a penniless orphan with nothing to offer but her labor. These thoughts occupied her mind as June's heat settled over the prairie. The days grew longer, the work harder as summer vegetables needed harvesting and preserving. Grant and the men worked from dawn to dusk, moving cattle to better grazing lands and repairing fences damaged by spring storms. One particularly scorching afternoon, Nora was preparing dough for the next morning's bread when pounding footsteps on the porch startled her. Caleb burst into the kitchen, his freckled face pale with urgency. "Miss Nora, it's the boss, he's hurt. Jake and Miguel are bringing him in now." Heart in her throat, Nora followed Caleb outside to see the men supporting Grant between them, his face contorted with pain and streaked with dirt. His left leg dragged uselessly. "What happened?" she demanded, already clearing the kitchen table. "Rattler spooked his horse," Jake explained as they eased Grant onto the table. "Threw him against a boulder. His leg's broken, I reckon, and maybe some ribs." Grant's eyes found hers, glassy with pain. "Not as bad as it looks," he managed through gritted teeth. "Liar," she said softly, touching his forehead. "Caleb, ride for the doctor. Miguel, I need hot water and clean towels. Jake, help me get his boot off before the swelling worsens." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Nora cut away Grant's pant leg to reveal a misshapen shin, already purpling with bruises. His left side showed similar discoloration where he'd struck the boulder. She cleaned his wounds, applied cold compresses to reduce swelling, and administered laudanum from the medicine cabinet to ease his pain. Dr. Peterson arrived by evening, confirming broken bones in Grant's leg and 2 cracked ribs. "You've done well," he told Nora after setting the leg and binding Grant's torso. "Keep him still for at least 6 weeks. The leg needs time to knit properly." After the doctor departed, Nora and the men carefully moved Grant to the sofa in the front room, as climbing stairs to his bedroom was impossible. She made him as comfortable as possible with pillows and blankets, then sent the exhausted ranch hands to rest. "You should sleep too," Grant said weakly as she adjusted a pillow beneath his injured leg. The laudanum had dulled his pain but left him drowsy. "I will. But first I need to make sure you're comfortable." His hand caught hers, his grip surprisingly strong. "Nora." Thank you. Something in his gaze, something unguarded and vulnerable, made her heart race. You would do the same for me, she said softly. Yes, he agreed, his voice fading as sleep claimed him. I would do anything for you. Nora remained beside him until his breathing deepened into sleep, her hand still clasped in his. Only then did she gently disengage herself and retreat to the kitchen, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't quite name. Grant's injury transformed life at the Double W. The ranch hands took on additional responsibilities, with Jake acting as foreman in Grant's stead. Nora's duties expanded to include nursing, changing bandages, administering medication, and helping Grant move when necessary. Those first days were difficult. Grant made a terrible patient, frustrated by his helplessness and the pain that even laudanum couldn't entirely mask. He snapped at everyone, then apologized with such genuine remorse that forgiveness was inevitable. Nora bore his moods with patient understanding, recognizing them as manifestations of a proud man's struggle with temporary dependency. When his temper flared, she gave him space. When melancholy overtook him, she distracted him with stories or the ranch news gathered from the hands. Gradually, as June ripened into July and the worst pain subsided, Grant's natural good humor returned. He began to appreciate the forced rest, using the time to catch up on bookkeeping and correspondence that had long been neglected. For Nora, the situation created an unexpected intimacy. Each morning, she helped Grant wash and shave, her fingers steady as they guided the razor across his strong jawline. She read to him in the evenings, discovering shared favorites among his collection of books. They played checkers and cards, talked for hours about everything and nothing, and developed a companionship that transcended their original roles. One sultry evening, as thunderclouds gathered on the horizon and the air hung heavy with impending rain, Nora sat beside Grant on the porch where they'd moved to catch what little breeze stirred. The ranch hands had retired early, leaving them alone in the gathering dusk. I received a letter from my sister today, Grant said, breaking a comfortable silence. She's expecting a child come winter. That's wonderful news, Nora smiled. You'll make a fine uncle, perhaps. He gazed toward the distant lightning. I've been thinking about family lately. About the future. Something in his tone made Nora glance at him. His profile in the fading light looked pensive, almost vulnerable. The accident reminded me how fragile life is, he continued, how quickly everything can change. It's made me consider what I truly want. And what is that? Nora asked, her voice barely audible above the first distant rumble of thunder. Grant turned to face her fully. A partner, children, a true home, not just a house where I sleep between workdays. Her heart quickened at the intensity in his blue eyes. Those are worthy desires. Before you came, I'd resigned myself to solitude. My work, the ranch, they seemed enough. He reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth through her despite the cooling air. They're not enough anymore, Nora. Rain began to fall, fat drops pattering on the porch roof. Neither moved. What are you saying, Grant? Her voice trembled slightly. I'm saying that these weeks of having you care for me, of sharing my days and thoughts with you, they've shown me what I've been missing. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you. The confession hung between them, more powerful than the storm now rolling across the prairie. Nora sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter this moment that felt both impossible and inevitable. You don't have to say anything now, Grant added gently. I know this is sudden, perhaps unwelcome. You came here for safety, not courtship. It's not unwelcome, Nora finally managed, her voice barely a whisper, but I'm just your housekeeper. Grant's expression softened. Is that all you think you are to me? What else could I be? I have nothing, Grant. No family, no dowry, no prospects beyond service. You have everything that matters. His hand lifted to gently touch her cheek. Kindness, strength, intelligence, beauty that comes from within and shines through those remarkable eyes. Tears welled in those eyes now. You deserve someone better. There is no one better. The simple certainty in his voice broke through her last defenses. I think I've been falling in love with you too, she confessed, but I've been afraid to acknowledge it, even to myself. Lightning flashed, illuminating Grant's face, his eyes shining with emotion, his mouth curved in a tender smile. May I kiss you, Nora Owens? At her shy nod, he leaned forward, his lips meeting hers with gentle reverence. The kiss was brief, sweet, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Nora felt transformed, as though something fundamental had shifted within her very soul. I don't expect an answer tonight, Grant said, still holding her hand. Take time to consider what I've said. What I'm offering is marriage, a partnership, if you'll have me. But only when you're ready. The rain fell harder now, a silver curtain beyond the porch. Nora watched it, gathering her courage. I don't need time, she said finally, turning back to him. My heart already knows its answer. Their second kiss deepened with shared longing, a culmination of feelings that had grown steadily since that first day she arrived at the W. When they finally parted, both were breathless, their faces flushed in the dim light. I should help you inside, Nora said, suddenly conscious of propriety despite their mutual declaration. The rain's bringing a chill. Grant laughed softly. Always practical, my Nora. My Nora. The simple phrase filled her with warmth as she helped him navigate back to the sofa. Once he was settled, she moved to leave, but he caught her hand. Stay a while longer. The storm's too fierce for you to cross to the stairs yet. It was a flimsy excuse. The stairs were merely across the room, but Nora settled beside him willingly, curled in the circle of his arm as they listened to the rain lashing against the windows. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt completely, unreservedly safe. The following weeks brought changes to the W. Grant and Nora's engagement wasn't formally announced, but the ranch hands noticed the shift in their relationship, the lingering glances, the casual touches, the way Grant now referred to our home and our plans when discussing the ranch's future. As July's heat gave way to August, Grant's leg healed enough for him to move about with crutches, relieving much of his frustration. Dr. Peterson pronounced him ahead of schedule, crediting Nora's diligent care. You two make a good team, the doctor observed as he prepared to leave after his final visit. When's the wedding? Grant glanced at Nora, who blushed deeply. We haven't set a date yet, he answered, but soon, I hope. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance above the prairie grass, Grant broached the subject properly. The doctor's question made me realize we haven't discussed details. He took her hand, an increasingly familiar gesture that still sent pleasant shivers through Nora. How soon would you like to marry, sweetheart? The endearment, used for the first time, made her smile. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I have, Grant admitted with a boyish grin. Perhaps too much, but I'd like to make it official before harvest if you're willing. We could marry in town or here at the ranch with just our friends. Nora considered this. A large wedding had never been her dream, especially with no family to share it. Here, I think, with the people who matter most to us. Grant nodded, satisfied. September, then. That gives us a month to prepare. September, she agreed, leaning against his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue sky. Planning their simple wedding became a joy that sustained them through August's brutal heat. Nora sewed her wedding dress in secret hours, using fine cream-colored fabric purchased on their next trip to town. Mrs. Wilson organized food for the celebration, while the ranch hands prepared the yard, building a wooden arch where the ceremony would take place. Grant's leg continued to improve, and by late August, he had discarded the crutches for a walking stick. His return to limited ranch duties lifted his spirits enormously, though Nora insisted he rest during the hottest parts of the day. On one such afternoon, as they shared iced tea in the relative coolness of the front room, Grant surprised Nora with a small velvet box. "This was my mother's," he explained as she opened it to reveal a delicate gold band set with 3 small diamonds. "My father gave it to me before he died, hoping I'd find someone worthy to wear it someday." Tears filled Nora's eyes as Grant slid the ring onto her finger. "It's beautiful. Are you certain you want me to have it? There's never been anyone more worthy." He kissed her gently. "I only wish my parents could have known you. And I wish my mother could see how happy I am," Nora replied softly. "She would have loved you, Grant. Because I love her daughter, because you're a good man, the kind she always hoped I'd find." Their wedding day dawned clear and mild, a perfect September Sunday. Nora dressed with Mrs. Wilson's help, her hands trembling slightly as she secured the last button on her simple but elegant gown. "You look radiant, dear," the older woman said, adjusting Nora's veil, a length of delicate lace that had once belonged to Grant's mother. "Grant won't know what hit him." Outside, nearly 30 guests had gathered, neighboring ranchers and their families, townspeople who had shown kindness to Nora, Grant's sister and her husband who had traveled from Colorado for the occasion. The ranch hands, scrubbed and uncomfortable in their Sunday best, stood proudest of all near the flower-adorned arch where Grant waited with the minister. When Nora appeared on Miguel's arm, he had shyly asked for the honor of giving her away. A hush fell over the gathering. Grant's face, as he watched her approach, held such love and wonder that Nora's last nervousness melted away. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to cherish and support one another through all of life's joys and sorrows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Grant kissed his bride with restrained tenderness that still managed to convey the depth of his feelings. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music provided by a neighboring rancher's fiddle and Miguel's surprising talent on the guitar. There was dancing, feasting, and so much laughter that Nora's cheeks ached from smiling. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Grant led Nora away from the festivities to a quiet spot beneath the cottonwood trees. "Happy, Mrs. Westfield?" he asked, drawing her close. "More than I ever imagined possible." She reached up to touch his face, still marveling that this good man was now her husband. "Thank you for offering me safety that day in town. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "You saved me too," Grant replied, his voice husky with emotion. "From loneliness, from a life half-lived. Everything I have, everything I am, is better because you're part of it." Their kiss beneath the star-filled Kansas sky sealed promises too profound for words, promises of love, partnership, and a future built on mutual respect and devotion. Later, after their guests departed, and they were finally alone in the bedroom that would now be theirs together, Nora discovered a new kind of tenderness in Grant's touch. His love transformed their first intimate moments from what might have been awkward uncertainty into a beautiful exchange of trust and passion. As they lay together in the quiet darkness, Grant's fingers gently tracing patterns on her bare shoulder, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "I keep thinking about that day we met," she murmured. "How desperate I was, how afraid. And now—" Grant's voice was soft against her hair. "Now I'm home," she answered simply, feeling his arms tighten around her in response. Autumn brought changes to the W. The ranch hands moved the cattle to winter pastures, and Grant immersed himself in preparations for the coming cold months. Nora canned the last of the garden's bounty and began knitting warm socks and scarves for her new family. Their first months of marriage unfolded with minor adjustments and discoveries. Grant learned that Nora treasured quiet mornings with coffee before the day's demands began. Nora discovered that Grant sometimes needed solitude after difficult days, not because he didn't want her company, but because he'd grown accustomed to processing troubles alone. They navigated these differences with growing understanding, building routines that honored both their needs while strengthening their bond. Sunday afternoons remained their special time hours set aside for rides across the prairie, or simply reading together by the fire as the weather cooled. In late November, as the first snow dusted the plains, Nora confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. With joyful tears, she shared the news with Grant one evening as they prepared for bed. A baby. His face transformed with wonder as he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without the doctor's confirmation. It should arrive next summer around July." Grant gathered her into his arms, his usual restraint abandoned in the face of such happiness. "A child," he whispered against her hair. "Our child." The winter of 1878-1879 proved harsh, with blizzards sweeping across the Kansas prairie and temperatures plummeting to record lows. The W weathered these trials better than many neighboring ranches, thanks to Grant's meticulous preparations and the collective efforts of everyone who called it home. As Nora's pregnancy progressed, her body rounded with new life. Grant became increasingly protective. He insisted on hiring additional help, a local girl named Emma to assist with household tasks, allowing Nora more rest. Spring's arrival in 1879 brought renewed energy to the ranch and its inhabitants. Calving season kept everyone busy, with new life appearing daily in the pastures. Nora, now visibly pregnant, prepared the small room adjoining their bedroom as a nursery, sewing tiny garments and quilting a blanket while she supervised Emma's work. June brought scorching heat that was especially difficult for Nora in her final weeks of pregnancy. Grant insisted she rest during the hottest parts of the day, often bringing her wildflowers or the season's first berries when he returned from his rounds. Their child arrived during a spectacular thunderstorm on July 12, 1879, a healthy boy with Grant's blue eyes and a powerful set of lungs that announced his entrance into the world with authority. They named him Thomas Michael Westfield, after both their fathers. "He's perfect," Grant whispered, cradling his son with awe-filled gentleness after the exhausted doctor had departed. Just like his mother. Nora, weary but radiant, watched her husband and child with overwhelming love. "He has your determination," she observed as tiny fingers gripped Grant's thumb with surprising strength. Parenthood transformed them both. Grant, always responsible, developed a tenderness that extended beyond his immediate family to everyone in his orbit. Nora discovered reserves of patience and wisdom she hadn't known she possessed, drawing on faint memories of her own mother's gentle guidance. Thomas thrived, growing from a robust infant into a curious toddler who delighted in exploring the ranch under his parents' watchful eyes. His first word, horse, made Grant beam with pride for days. Life settled into new rhythms as the seasons turned. The W prospered under Grant's stewardship, allowing for improvements to the house and expansion of their cattle operation. Nora established a larger garden and began selling preserves and baked goods in town, enjoying the independence of her small enterprise. In the spring of 1881, when Thomas was nearing 2 years old, Nora discovered she was expecting their second child. The news brought joy tempered with caution. Her first pregnancy had been relatively easy, but every woman knew the uncertainties of childbearing. "We'll take every precaution," Grant promised, his concern evident despite his smile. "Dr. Peterson will visit regularly, and Emma can stay on full time." Their daughter, Elizabeth Rose Westfield, arrived in November 1881, a delicate beauty with her mother's honey-brown hair and sweet temperament. Thomas approached his baby sister with solemn curiosity that soon blossomed into fierce protectiveness. On a crisp December evening, as snow fell gently outside, the Westfield family gathered in the warm kitchen. Grant bounced Elizabeth on his knee while Thomas helped Nora decorate Christmas cookies, his small hands covered in flour and colored sugar. "I received a letter today," Grant said casually, "from a lawyer in Denver." Nora looked up, curious. "What did it say?" "Frank Ridley died in a mining accident 2 months ago." Grant watched her face carefully. "The lawyer is trying to locate any family for the distribution of his effects. Apparently, he mentioned a stepdaughter in Kansas." Nora absorbed this news with surprising calmness. "I haven't been that stepdaughter for a long time." "No," Grant agreed, shifting Elizabeth to his shoulder, "but legally you might be entitled to something." "I don't want anything of his." Her voice was firm but not bitter. "Whatever he left, it can go to charity or back to the state." "Frank Ridley has no place in our lives." Grant nodded, understanding. "I'll write back tomorrow." Later, after the children were asleep and they sat together by the fire, Nora returned to the subject. "It's strange to think he's gone. For so long he was this shadow I feared might someday reappear." "Are you all right?" Grant's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Yes." She leaned into his embrace. "I realized something when you told me I've been free of Frank Ridley since the day I left Salina, not just physically, but here." She touched her heart. "I stopped letting fear of him control my choices." "You're the bravest person I know," Grant said softly. "You always have been." Nora smiled, thinking of how far she'd come from that frightened young woman who'd fled her stepfather's house with nothing but a small bundle of possessions and desperate hope. "Not brave, just fortunate to find someone who saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself." "I saw everything," Grant corrected, kissing her gently. "Everything you are, everything you could be, everything we could build together." And build they had. The Double W Ranch expanded over the following years, becoming one of the most successful operations in the county. Thomas and Elizabeth grew strong and confident under their parents' loving guidance, joined in 1884 by another brother, James Allen Westfield. As the frontier gradually transformed with the arrival of railroads and more settlers, Grant adapted their ranching practices, while maintaining the core values that had always guided him: hard work, fair dealing, and family above all else. Nora's small business ventures flourished alongside the ranch. Her preserves won prizes at county fairs, and she eventually opened a modest bakery in town that employed several local women. The shy, uncertain girl who had fled an abusive home blossomed into a respected businesswoman and cherished matriarch. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, Grant surprised Nora with a journey to St. Louis, the farthest either had traveled from Kansas. For 2 wonderful weeks, they explored the city, attended the theater, and marveled at the changes the approaching new century was bringing. On their last evening, as they stood on the banks of the Mississippi River watching the sunset paint the water gold, Grant took Nora's hand in his. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. "About the life we've built." Nora looked up at the man who had saved her, loved her, and helped her become more than she'd ever dreamed possible. His hair now showed strands of silver at the temples, and lines of experience marked his face, but his blue eyes still held the same warmth that had first earned her trust all those years ago. "Not one," she answered honestly. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, they've all been worth it because we faced them together." Grant's smile, tender and true, reflected the depth of feeling that had only strengthened with the passing years. "When I offered you work at my ranch that day, I never imagined how completely you would transform my life. When I accepted, I was only hoping for safety," Nora admitted. "But you gave me so much more: a home, a family, a love I never thought possible." As twilight deepened around them, they stood in comfortable silence, hands clasped and hearts aligned as they had been since that rainy evening on the porch when they first confessed their feelings. Behind them lay a past with its share of hardships. Before them stretched a future bright with continued promise. And in that perfect moment between, they found themselves exactly where they were meant to be together. The journey that began with a desperate young woman seeking refuge and a lonely rancher offering safety had become a love story written across decades, a testament to the healing power of kindness and the strength found in choosing love over fear. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above the great river, Nora and Grant Westfield turned toward home, carrying with them the unshakable certainty that their greatest adventure remained the life they continued to build together, day by day. On the Kansas prairie, they both loved.